Vampires and Dracula have been the most prominent antagonists in folklore and stories for generations now. Over the period, these undead creatures and sadistic bloodsuckers have become mainstream in not just the horror or thriller genre, but also in the romantic and drama category of movies and series. There is something about these immortal supernatural beings with invincible powers that continue to mystify the viewers even today. Today at MV, we are going to dwell on the stories of 15 such ferocious vampires who have been part of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer series and discuss their powers, capabilities, and ultimately what contributed to their end. Let us begin. But before we go into our explanation, we do have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Turok-Han. Turok-Han are archaic supernatural vampire creatures who first appeared in Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 7. Rupert Giles, one of the characters in the series, defines Turok-Han as primordial, ferocious, powerful killing machines as single-minded as animals. Turok-Han to vampires are what Neanderthals are to humans. The modern-day vampires are fearful of these ancient and entirely different races of bloodsuckers. The Scooby Gang refers to Turok-Han as Ubervamp, implying a demon species that existed prior to vampires. Han's origin is traced from the time when the first evil, through its harbingers of death, used the combined blood of Jonathan Levinson and Spike to unlock the seal of Danzelthar and thus release the first Turok-Han. An encounter with this monster is anything but fatal, as Buffy Summers almost died when she was caught off guard by its presence. The second time they met Turok-Han was after it had already killed Annabelle, one of the first potential slayers. No matter how much Buffy tried her best to evade the creature, it seemed to be hovering over her and finally forcing her to flee. This vampire creature is not just terrifying but also sadistic, as is obvious from its instances of torturing a captive Spike. Towards the end, Buffy bravely chases Turok-Han and after a long battle, kills him in front of the potential slayers. Later, it was revealed that there is a probability of thousands of Turok-Han existing underneath the seal. The first evil even planned on opening the Hellmouth and releasing all of them so that they could create havoc on the human race. Eventually, a couple more Turok-Han were released. They were finally eliminated when Buffy and other slayers ventured into the Hellmouth and killed all of them while also releasing Spike. Powers and abilities. Its powers and abilities were way superior to ordinary vampires. Turok-Han, in most instances, easily overpowered Buffy. Unlike the conventional vampires, the cross and other religious symbols did not discourage Turok-Han from entering the human residence. It also had invincible strength, as is evident from the fact that it was able to push an entire wheelbarrow filled with timbers and tools by a mere shove of its hand, and could also turn a cinder block into dust with no repercussion on itself, and its claws could skin a human in seconds. Turok-Han also depicted regenerative abilities from any type of attack. Just like vampires, Turok-Han also possessed speed that could be equated to teleportation. Despite its resilient powers, Turok-Han shared the same weaknesses as other vampires, such as abhorrence to sunlight, staking and decapitation, and holy water. Angel. Well, even though Turok-Han must have had many advantages against vampires, it didn't have good looks. There isn't any denying that Turok-Han was extremely hideous to look at, but the first thought our next vampire invokes is that, damn, it's gorgeous and handsome. Angel is one of the most popular vampires in the entire vampiric history. Angel was born as Liam in 1727 and was converted into its immortal form by Darla. He originally took up the title of Angelus and turned out to be a very evil and notorious vampire known to mankind. His pure, devious instincts were well appreciated by both the Master and the First Evil. Given his physical beauty, he earned the title of the One with the angelic face. In 1898, Angelus was cursed by the Calderash people as revenge against him for killing their favorite daughter. They returned his soul, burdening him with eternal guilt over the countless ruthless crimes he had committed in the past century. The 20th century version of Angelus is called the Angel, and he has a tragic romantic trope with Buffy Summers. Soon after realizing their limitation as a vampire-human couple, Angel moves to Los Angeles. He then becomes a harbinger of good and redemption by becoming the Champion, who is a heroic individual who uses his power and integrity to sacrifice for the greater good. Angel sacrificed himself to the aid of the helpless and hopeless with the Angel investigations in the hope of attaining atonement. Angel also goes on to adopt the identity of the masked Twilight and counter the humans and demons who are antithetical to the work of the Slayers. Once the world was safeguarded, Angel decided to stay in London and help people in the newly established magic town. Powers and abilities. Angel possesses enhanced vampire abilities, such as immortality, regeneration from injuries, superhuman physical strength, and proactive senses. His advanced age worked to his advantage as his speed could facilitate teleportation, and he also had a great degree of resilience that enabled him to tolerate pain without succumbing to them. He had advanced combat skills and was proficiently trained in martial arts skills, kickboxing, and wrestling. He could also use various deadly weapons against the enemy. Angel also had a fair share of experience in magic and sorcery. Master. The Master was one of the longest living dead. He was originally known as Heinrich Joseph Nest and was an authoritative and respected figure among the vampiric community. He was also the leader of the Order of Aurelius, a vampire cult that worshipped the Old Ones and sought to enable their return to Earth. The Master was also responsible for resurrecting Darla, who then went on to become his disciple. The Master also became acquainted with Angelus and buried him in the ground because Angelus had scoffed at the Master's appearance. To talk about his appearance, Master resembled a lot to Turok Khan because of his extensively wrinkled and brooded facial expressions. Unlike other cult leaders, he did not resist Darla and Angel's love affair. Master encountered the Slayers in Sunnydale when Buffy had interrupted the ritual of blood drawing by one of Master's acolytes. Buffy further annoyed the Master by killing more of his cherished minions, such as Zachary. The Master was finally destroyed by Buffy by throwing him through the skylight and impaling him on a large piece of wood. Surprisingly, upon his demise, he left behind a skeleton, contrary to other vampires who had just turned to fine dust. Powers and abilities. His advanced age provided him with strength, speed, reflexes, and resilience, just like other vampires. One example would be when he had initially defeated Buffy, almost killing her. The Master also utilized his fingernails in combat such that they could slice anything that came in its way. The Master also had an unusual immunity to crosses and had also destroyed the very church in which he was imprisoned for 60 years. He also possessed hypnotic abilities that allowed him to take control of people's senses and had a high occult aptitude and knowledge of sorcery and magic that he used to open the Hellmouth. Dracula, considered a myth by many and a reality by others, Dracula has been a significant character in various vampire stories and tales. Dracula was a famous and powerful vampire who harbored some unique abilities that differentiated him from other vampires. He was an antagonist against the Scooby Gang's principal slayer Buffy Summers, but ironically also had an unusual friendship with another gang member, Xander. As a mortal being, Dracula was known as Vlad the Impaler. It has been rumored that he had brutally killed more people than even the plague could. Dracula was fairly disliked in the normal vampire community, as they blamed him for revealing the vulnerabilities of vampires to human society. His rivalry with another vampire, Spike, was also well known. In the 19th century, Dracula's story was published in Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, which skyrocketed his fame among both his friends and foes. Dracula met Buffy in Sunnydale in the year 2000, when she had been lured into his mansion by Xander, whom Dracula had hypnotized to be his servant. After a tense confrontation, Buffy staked Dracula twice so that he could not reform himself back. Powers and abilities. Besides the regular powers that all vampires are endowed with, Dracula had the mystic, magical aptitude and hypnosis. Dracula claimed that his powers were part of the ancient magics which he had acquired by risking his very soul, and now he was their worldly guardian. Using magic, he could also shapeshift by converting himself into various nocturnal animals. His older age granted him greater speed and strength. He was also proficient in hand-to-hand combat skills as well as sword fighting. Dracula could also display functional vampire fangs and eyes without taking on the full vampire visage. He also had the unusual ability to not only read people's minds, but also slide into their dreams, and had the power of flight by shape-shifting into a bat or a bee, or even a cloud of mist.
Me and Drew.
Dracula. Druscilla's trial of being turned into a vampire is filled with tragedy and distress. She was born in the mid-19th century London and was a devoted Christian, dutiful daughter, and chaste, along with her ability to foresee the future. When Darla crossed paths with Drusilla, she instantly knew that she needed to be introduced to Angel. When Angel got to know about Drusilla's pious and sweet nature, he immediately became obsessed with her and wanted to turn her into his masterpiece. After stalking her for a prolonged period, Angelus ruthlessly murdered her entire family in cold blood and forced Drusilla to witness this horrendous act. He let Drusilla free and she took refuge in a convent, but being traumatized and devastated by the loss of her family, her mental status was left deranged. She is then converted into a vampire by Angelus, and for the next 2 decades, she travels with Darla and terrorizes Europe. Drusilla later resurrected a young English poet, William Pratt, who was later popularized as Spike. Drusilla's powers weakened in 1996 after she had been captured by a mob in Prague. To revive her powers, Spike took her to Hellmouth in Sunnydale, which was guarded by the Slayers. In the year 2000, Drusilla was hired by Wolfram and Hart to sire her grandmother, Darla, who had turned into a human. Powers and abilities. Her powers and abilities can be elucidated as mostly psychic powers and hypnosis. She used her sharp nails in her combat skills, and she was also accustomed to fencing. Her powers to predict the future were manifested in the form of vivid visions. Unlike other vampires, Drusilla could express empathy and also feel other human emotions as humans did.
That's right, dog! Fight back!
Spike is a 19th century English poet, originally William Pratt, who had been resurrected from the dead into a vampire by Drusilla. He is a fierce vampire, having faced and killed 2 slayers during his life. He also is infamous for torturing his victims with railroad spikes. In the feat of being evil and sinister, he is considered parallel to Angel. In his human form, William was an aspirational romantic poet who failed to gain any recognition. He, too, along with Drusilla and Darla, terrorized Europe throughout the 20th century. Spike had traveled to Sunnydale in 1997, accompanied by Drusilla, and he soon became one of the formidable enemies of Buffy Summers. Eventually, Spike falls in love with Buffy and officially becomes a member of the Scoobies as a protector of Buffy's sister, Dawn. Spike went on to sacrifice himself in the battle against the first evil and defeated its Turok Khan-led army, thus permanently closing the Hellmouth and eventually devastating the town of Sunnydale. Spike also struggled to find his deserved status as a champion, just like Angel. Spike then joined Angel in his battle against the senior partners. Spike also retained the status of Lord of Beverly Hills during the fall of Los Angeles. He also assisted Buffy and the Scoobies in their battle against Twilight. Powers and abilities. Spike has pretty standard powers and vulnerabilities of a vampire. He is immortal, can regenerate himself from injuries, and has obvious superhuman physical strength along with advanced sensory skills. His combat skills are excellent, as Lloyd referred to him as a legendary dark warrior, and Spike, using his versatile fighting techniques, killed 2 Slayers. His intelligence facilitated him to design sound and effective battle strategies when needed. Another fun fact about Spike is that he is multilingual and speaks fluent Latin, Laganda, and Fayarl in addition to his native language, English.
Ow!
Harmony Kendall. Harmony Kendall was a former Sunnydale High School popular girl who got sired into a vampire in the year 1999 by one of Wilkins' vampire minions. Years later, Harmony began her attempts to establish a stable social life in Los Angeles. She started working as Angel's secretary at Wolfram and Hart Los Angeles branch. Meanwhile, Harmony also shares an erratic, romantic relationship with Spike. Unlike other vampires, Harmony had to deal with the problem of her inability to turn into an evil vampire. Even while trying to torture Eve into revealing information, all that Harmony could do was hit Eve in the face a few times. At her workplace, her inputs, ideas, and suggestions were undermined by Angel and her other team members. Given her lack of emotional intelligence and inefficiency in controlling her thirst for blood, she bit a famous comedian, Andy Dick, and put the entire vampire community at risk of being exposed to the world. However, after this biting incident, her rise to fame and glamour began. She went on to become the star of a reality show named Harmony Bites. At one point, she also became an advocate of vampire rights after she had killed a lone slayer who had been trying to demolish her into dust. She was also interviewed by Anderson Cooper and later also declared slayers as a nuisance to society rather than heroes. Soon, she also advanced the practice of reform vampirism, where the vampires would only suck the blood of those who consented to it and never had to kill anyone or sire them. Powers and abilities. She had a charismatic persona that enabled her to garner followers in the human community. Her beauty and her public speaking skills facilitated her engagement on various TV shows and other platforms, which she then utilized to create disapproval against Buffy and her Slayer gang members. In addition to her celebrity status, Harmony also exercised significant political influence, as she would advocate vampire rights very often. Her other powers and abilities are similar to other vampires, such as strong resilience towards injuries and superhuman strength, where she could lift an entire damn shoe cabinet like she was picking up a shoe. However, unlike other vampires, Harmony had terrible combat and defensive abilities and fighting skills, so poor that even a human could hold up well against her.
Alone at last.
Vampire Willow. Willow Danielle Rosenberg was a vampire and the alternative timeline counterpart of the witch Willow Rosenberg. Being a member of the Order of Aurelius, she was one of the leading acolytes of the Master, alongside her lover Xander. Willow debuted in the episode The Wish and was last seen in the Doppelgangland. When Cordelia wished to Anya that Buffy had never moved to Sunnydale, the vengeance demon transported her to a reality in which the absence of the Slayer had allowed the town to be dominated by vampires. Willow, accompanied by Xander, encountered Cordelia alone in the streets, oblivious to their identity as vampires. Together, they attempted to bite her, but she was saved by the White Hats at the last minute. Willow and Xander later trapped Giles at the Sunnydale High School library, and the duo drank Cordelia's blood. Concluding their mission, the Master allowed Willow to play with her puppy, which meant torturing Angel, the traitor vampire with a soul, with Xander being the spectator. Later, while the Master inaugurated his plan to mass-produce human blood for vampire consumption, Buffy Summers and the White Hats arrived at the blood plant and started a battle. In the mainstream Sunnydale, the vampire Willow was bothered to see the humans roaming freely at night. She had an altercation with Perry West in the Bronze, which would make him respect the main Willow. Following this event, Willow exposed her vampire face to Alexander and Buffy, causing them to believe that Willow was then undead. Disappointed with this reality, Willow found herself wandering through the streets until she was found by a group of vampire assassins sent by Mayor Wilkins. She subdued them all and made them her minions through intimidation of the leader Alphonse. With this, she proceeded to try to make the world as it was in her reality. They started by taking over the Bronze, then taking the patrons as hostages where she sired Sandy. At the club, Anya recognized Vampire Willow's influence and convinced her that she could help her get back to her world. But first, they needed this world's Willow to perform the spell. The vampire tried to kidnap her human counterpart in the school library, but was overpowered by a tranquilizer gun. Switching clothes with her vampire counterpart, the human Willow helped the Scooby Gang retake the Bronze. The vampire Willow was returned to her world by Anya, Giles, and Willow, though she was returned the exact moment she was taken. Captured by the Wishverse versions of Oz and Larry, she was pushed into a broken wooden board and was turned into dust within fractions of a second. While she was undead, Vampire Willow possessed all the conventional powers and limitations of any other regular vampire. She was also a formidable fighter, capable of defeating a pack of vampires all alone by herself.
Come on, Buffy.
Darla. Darla was a young and wealthy prostitute in the 17th century who was dying of syphilis when she was sired by the Master in her luxurious house. In 1753, while haunting the streets of a village in Ireland, Darla came across an attractive young man named Liam. Darla seduced Liam and sired him, thus claiming him to be her romantic interest and renaming him as Angel. The couple were demonic and of utmost evil in their pursuit, as in 1765 they brutally killed the infant son and wife of Daniel Holtz, a renowned vampire slayer, and also sired his daughter. Traumatized by the actions, Holtz vowed to seek revenge and destroy the two vampires. The two lovers separated when in 1900 Angelus was unable to kill an innocent baby on Darla's order. Angelus fled with the baby and forever denounced Darla. Later, Angelus, who had by then taken the name of Angel, had also staked Darla to protect Buffy and her mother. Darla was resurrected as a human 3 years later after the notorious law firm Wolfram and Hart performed a raising ritual from the Scroll of Aubergine so that she could torment Angel and turn him back to his evil form. In 2000, Darla was again sired into a vampire by Dracula. Darla is among the few vampires who have experienced motherhood. Darla had become pregnant after Angel had been awarded an extra life after enduring the trials in an attempt to save Darla when she was dying. It was then conveyed that Darla's pregnancy was inherently impossible, thus she couldn't even abort it. Many suspected the child to be a more vicious, evil vampire, but it turned out that the child was only a normal, healthy human baby boy. However, her pregnancy ended tragically when, to save her child, Darla decided to sacrifice her own life, thus staking herself and leaving behind a pile of dust. Powers and abilities. Darla's capabilities are pretty standard, just like her fellow vampires. However, her being a fairly senior vampire enabled her to be more physically strong and have greater resistance to holy items. Darla also displayed the psychic connection that vampires would inhibit with their sire, and as a result, could often sense Angel's presence when he was in proximity. She also retained this feature even when she had been turned into a human for a brief period. Kakistos. Kakistos was an old vampire whose name in Greek translated to the worst, much like his appearance, as his hands and feet have been turned into cloven hooves. He also had a frightening scar that ran down his right side eyebrow and blinded his right eye. The scar had been left by a slayer, Faith Lahane, after she tried to stop Kakistos from killing her first watcher. Unable to defeat Kakistos, Faith and Buffy evaded, and Kakistos vowed to avenge the Slayers for what they had done to him. Kakistos then traveled down all the way to Sunnydale along with his entourage of minions, who were being led by Mr. Trick, Kakistos' right hand and modern-minded vampire. When the group finally located Buffy and Faith, they led the duo into the vampire's hideout where they decided to kill them. However, in the ensuing fight, Mr. Trick and his minions abandoned Kakistos as his hideout lacked any modern amenities like cable TV, light, and electricity. Capturing the chance, the Slayers attacked Kakistos with a stake and support beam, ultimately destroying him into fine dust. Powers and abilities. He possessed the same powers as most vampires, such as invincible strength, regenerative tendencies, and heightened senses, but all these to a higher degree given he was considerably very old. Also, common-sized stakes were ineffective against him, as they could, at most, injure him but not slay him. This is the reason that after Buffy had staked Kakistos, Faith had used a wooden beam to dust him permanently. Anointed One. Anointed One was the title granted to a prophesized ally of the Master who would lead the Slayer to him for his freedom. A young boy named Colin took up the position of the Anointed, who facilitated the prophecy of bringing Buffy Summers to her first death. Colin was resurrected as a vampire when a group of travelers, which included 4 adults and 1 child, died in an accident in Sunnydale. Whereas the Scoobies were able to increase the newly risen vampire, they failed to prevent the Anointed One's rise, as the Master just welcomed the 8-year-old. The Anointed One lured Buffy Summers into the church where the Master had been imprisoned for a long time. Master then used his hypnosis to lay Buffy unconscious and then bit her mercilessly, leaving her to drown. Buffy was then revived through CPR and went ahead and destroyed the Master. Months later, the Anointed also conducted a failed attempt to restore the Master by the revivification ritual.
Grant a sign, if crooked be Cupid's shaft.
Anne Pratt. Anne was the mother of Vampire Spike when he existed in his human form as William Pratt. She was also the first vampire whom Spike had sired. Even though Spike had intense extremities to his nature, he was a devoted son, as he had once told Anne, "I will always look after you, mother. This is a promise." The mother and son had always shared a deep emotional bond of love and care. Even when William struggled to get recognized for his poetry, his mother, Anne, was his only ardent supporter who would appreciate and encourage his work. After Drusilla had sired William, he came back and sired his mother, who had been sick with tuberculosis and was almost on the verge of dying. His only intention was to save his mother from the disease and be able to live with her for eternity. However, things turned downhill when, after being sired, Anne began despising her son. She felt suffocated by his care and love for her and wanted to get rid of him. This obsession of her even drove her to try to stake William William with her own cane. In the resulting fight, William broke the cane in two and used one to stake Anne and turn her into dust. Years later, after William had gained recognition as Spike, he realized that the demon into whom Anne had turned after becoming a vampire was far from his mother. "When I sired her, I let loose a demon and it tore into me. But that was the demon talking, not her. I realize that now." Luke was a vampire member of the Order of Aurelius and the vessel for the Master during the Harvest in 1996. Luke was sired sometime before 1843. In 1996, he was greeted by the Master after his rest lasted for 70 years. Luke had his first encounter with Buffy when she tried to resist two other members of the Order, Darla and Thomas. When Thomas died, Luke came to Darla's assistance and proved stronger than her. However, he was repulsed when he came in contact with the religious cross that she wore around her neck, which had been given to her by Angel. Luke was later also chosen as the vessel for the Master. He would prey on his victims and then transfer his strength to the Master, whom he finally channeled to escape from the mystical prison. "Luke is the vessel. Every soul he takes will feed me." Luke was turned to dust after Buffy staked him while he was about to bite Cordelia Chase. His demise also stalled the ritual meant for freeing the Master, and he remained in prison. Powers and abilities. Luke was a pretty basic vampire with all the advantages and disadvantages of other vampires. Given that he was old, he was comparatively more agile and strong. Luke also shared a supernatural inherent connection with the Master that allowed the latter to gain strength from the blood of anyone Luke would bite.
Oh, and this. This is my...
Sunday. Sunday was the vampire leader of a gang residing in the Psi Theta fraternity of UC Sunnydale. The other gang members are Dav, Tom, Jerry, and Rookie. Before crossing paths with Buffy Summers, Sunday and her gang members committed extremely sinister acts of preying on the freshmen and killing them. The missing students were merely accorded as dropouts who couldn't handle the college academic pressure. After meeting Buffy for the first time, Sunday defeated her in their first fight and also sprained her arm as she mistook her to be a freshman student. Sunday was finally killed after Buffy staked her with a broken tennis racket in the Psi Theta fraternity after she deliberately shattered her class protector award.
No, I'm hungry.
Trick. He was one of the modern vampires who had been associated with working with Kakistos and later Mayor Richard Wilkins. In late 1998, Trick arrived at Sunnydale to hunt down Faith Lehane, one of the Slayers. Driven by his dislike for Kakistos, he did not bother to help him when he was destroyed by Faith. After Kakistos' death, Trick relocated to a mansion where he hosted the Slayer Fest and called up humans and demons who were antithetical to the Slayers and gambled money for the chance to hunt down Buffy Summers and Faith Lehane. The contest failed as assassins mistook Cordelia Chase for Faith. After this, Trick was taken under police custody and appointed to serve the mayor as the leader of his vampire minions. In 1999, Trick was serving as Mayor Wilkins' mediator, assisting him at the beginning of his ascension, but later turned himself into his hitman. Trick chased Buffy and Faith at the Sunnydale docks to avenge the death of Finch. He had even successfully defeated Buffy by choking her with his tie, but just as he was about to drink her blood, Faith staked him in the back. Hours later, Trick's position was filled by Faith herself. Marvelous verdict. This was all about the 15 enigmatic and powerful vampires who have appeared across different episodes and seasons of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer series. Using the intrinsic abilities that they had acquired after becoming part of the undead, they continued to jeopardize Buffy and the other Scooby Gang members' lives. This was it for this video, and stay tuned for the next marvelous video on our channel. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe out there. Thanks, everyone.